Phil Collins, the hidden tragedy of an exceptional musician, the injury that took away his life on stage. Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Carlos Alvarez Peña, neurosurgeon. On this channel, we analyze, from the perspective of neurosurgery and medicine in general, the human fragility behind great personalities. Today, with empathy and respect and using only public information and verified sources, we will review the clinical case of Phil Collins, one of the most influential musicians of the last half-century. We won't talk about his extensive discography, we'll talk about the man and his illnesses. Phil Collins received his first drum set from his parents when he was 3 years old, and later, at 17, they bought him another one, second-hand from a neighbor. Human things. Decades later, as documented by BBC News in 2016, Collins joined Genesis in 1970 as the official drummer when he was just 19 years old. That early professional exposure meant decades of cervical microtraumas, postures of hyperflexion and hyperextension, constant vibrations transmitted from his arms to his spine, and a very unique drumming style that shaped his anatomy. The high cymbals, his visual trademark, forced him into extreme neck movements that over the years would take their toll. Phil Collins designed how and where every part of his drum set was placed and how to play them. He doesn't read music, and it's clear that this has never been a problem for him. His son Nick Collins recalls, "My dad didn't play with his hands," he used to say. "He played with his whole body." That phrase is pure biomechanics. For a neurosurgeon, it means repeated cervical rotation, axial impact, chronic ligament overload, hyperextension for more than 40 years, and therefore potential cervical degenerative disc disease, if not throughout the entire spine. It's a hypothesis, since drummers like Jonathan Sugarfoot Moffett and other great drummers set up their drum kits in a similar way, which leads me to think that in Phil Collins' case, the main cause of his deterioration was actually his fall. In 2007, Phil Collins suffered a severe fall that damaged his cervical spinal column and its contents, the spinal cord, causing spinal cord compression and affecting the corticospinal tracts, those pathways that carry movement commands from the brain to the rest of the human body. It also affected the ascending pathways that transmit sensation to the brain, and in this specific case, the protopathic sensation, which tells us where our limbs and our body are in general. But also a progressive loss of fine motor skills and clumsiness in the upper limbs. Phil explains it like this: "After the fall, my hands stopped responding. I couldn't hold the drumsticks. The level of injury was probably below the C5 vertebra since there was no apparent respiratory compromise." Between 2009 and 2017, Collins underwent 3 cervical surgeries. The one in 2015 was the most important, a decompression that was necessary to stop, to halt the damage. He himself said, "The surgery relieved the pressure, but my nerves never worked again." From a neurosurgical perspective, this means established myelopathy, that is spinal cord damage, irreversible axonal degeneration, in other words, irreversible nerve damage, and permanent fine motor disconnection. After a second fall in 2017, foot drop or a dropped foot appeared. His son Nick states in the documentary, "Years of poor posture and the neck surgery caused the foot drop." Clinically, this means a pyramidal lesion that is damage to the pathways that move the limbs, or also involvement of the deep peroneal nerve, which impairs dorsiflexion of the foot. Since then, Phil began to need a cane and later on, constant assistance to walk. In the documentary Phil Collins, Drummer First, we see the great Phil clearly limited in his ability to walk, quadriparetic as we say, lacking strength in all 4 limbs. That is, a patient with significant limitations, using a cane and with the support of his son Nick to be able to walk, noticeably thinner, sarcopenic, I would say, yet tremendously lucid and even cheerful. It's not hard to notice a bruised lesion on his right hand, purplish, typical of the use of antiplatelet agents, and also with glasses that reveal severe refractive error plus presbyopia. Many fans ask, why didn't he go back to playing if he already had surgery? Although his last concert was in March in London with Genesis, he had to do it sitting down, and more than once we see him letting his son Nick take over on the drums. The medical answer to that question is that, in general, the spinal cord does not regenerate. Fine motor tracts do not recover. Sensory tracts don't either. Digital dexterity is the first thing to go and the last to return, if it returns at all. Phil describes it like this: "It's not pain, it's disconnection." That is exactly what we see in chronic myelopathy, in chronic spinal cord damage. Collins admitted in public interviews, "We used to smoke a little. There was that time," he says, dead time between the sound check and the concert. The last time I smoked, says Collins, was at a concert in Los Angeles in 76 or 77. It wasn't about dependence, but rather an occasional habit typical of the musical environment of the 70s. Let's remember that the habit of smoking, generally linked to lung cancer or myocardial infarction, is also associated with degenerative disease of the spine. Smoking causes direct, measurable, and progressive damage to the spine, especially to the intervertebral discs and the bones. And this is solidly documented in orthopedics, neurosurgery, and the pathophysiology of intervertebral tissue. In addition, it accelerates disc degeneration, increases the risk of disc herniation, and reduces the ability to recover from spinal surgeries. Intervertebral discs do not have direct blood supply. They rely on the diffusion of nutrients and oxygen through the vertebrae themselves, and since nicotine causes vasoconstriction, it reduces peripheral oxygenation, limits nutrient diffusion, and increases oxidative stress. Smoking is yet another factor that contributed to the perfect storm leading to Phil Collins' spinal cord and vertebral injury. Additionally, the touring lifestyle, stress, irregular sleep, physical and emotional pressure undoubtedly affected his neurological resilience. Later on, during the years of chronic pain and divorces, Collins went through periods of severe alcohol consumption. And here comes one of his most painful confessions, quoted by BBC News in 2016. "Night after night, I find myself lying in bed," he says, "looking through a skylight at the grey Swiss sky, lamenting my life." And he continues, "I am completely alone except for my good friends Johnny Walker and Grey Goose." These words are not about vice, they speak of suffering. That is part of Phil Collins' life. Phil has 5 children, Simon, Jocelyn, Lily, Matthew, and Nicholas, Nick, whom we've been talking about. Nick, inherited his way of playing. Simon inherited his musical sensitivity. Lily Collins, the star of Made in Paris, inherited his emotional strength and artistic expressiveness. Phil says, "Music is my life, but my children are my soul." Something very reflective for a musician of this stature. Phil Collins could no longer play with so many spinal injuries. He could no longer walk without assistance, but he kept singing, kept creating, and kept inspiring. Watching him sing seated while his son Nick played the drums is one of the most moving moments in modern rock. "Maybe I truly can't play the game," he says, "but I can still deeply feel it." And for a neurosurgeon, that's a lesson about the enormous resilience of the human mind, of human will. Thank you for joining me in this analysis of the life, injuries, and resilience of Phil Collins, the drummer, the frontman, the father, or simply the man who won some battles and lost others. But that's life. I am Dr. Carlos Alvarez Peña, neurosurgeon. On this channel, we explore how science reveals the limits and adaptations of the human body and mind. Subscribe to join us. In upcoming episodes, we will look at the biographies and injuries of other figures who have impacted the history of humanity in general and modern cultural history in particular. See you in the next episode.